Once you've seen one of these creatures, it changes you. You're more open to possibilities, but haunted by it at the same time. It's something I think about all the time. When I hunt, the woods seem different, like I know something others don't. And the nightmares, I had them long before this thing ever came along. Vietnam got me first. This just helped amplify them. Until I talked to you, Mike, I never thought anyone would want to hear my story. I'm willing to share, as long as you don't mention any personal information. I'm willing to share as long as my privacy is respected. One evening, my wife and I were reminiscing about our early years when we dated. I remembered our first date was a double date with my sister and brother-in-law, and although that was technically right, she said that we initially went out to dinner after we met at the farmhouse. I completely forgot. Yes, it was at her dad's farmhouse where my sister planned the setup. Not everybody loves family meddling in your life, but this was the greatest thing that ever happened, in my opinion. Of course, she didn't mention Bigfoot, because I never told her the full story, and apparently neither did her dad. But now, it's different for some strange reason. Her dad has been gone for 12 years. I want to tell her. Maybe she knows something. So long ago, but yet still so fresh in my mind, I'm not sure I'll ever forget. I'd only been out of the military a few years. I think my experiences in Vietnam may have prepared me better than I could have possibly expected. I had to step up to prevent what I imagined could have been catastrophic. In my opinion, leaders are not born, but made on the battlefield. I had good instincts, so therefore I was selected by my commanding officer to become a junior officer and would lead a platoon in the Vietnam War. Leadership is the most important thing on the battlefield, and the enemy knows it, specifically targeting you. Even though you're not the point man typically, you're somewhere up front, which exposes you to booby traps and ambushes. Officers are the first ones on the ground and off the helicopter, and the last ones to get back in. By the way, those are always the most dangerous times. Don't think for a second I didn't realize it. As I said before, the enemy is looking to take out your whole platoon, but specifically take out the leadership, which meant me. The fatalities were high, not just for enlisted, but also for officers. It was a different time, and it required ground troops. It was the summer of 1975. I'd been back in the States for a few years, still trying to find my way and moving about every couple of months. I saw a lot of the country. I packed up and left Florida for an opportunity to work alongside my brother-in-law at his car repair shop. I hadn't seen my sister or her husband in quite some time, before I went to Vietnam. Their 2 boys had sprouted like weeds since the last time I'd seen them. I spent the next week settling in and getting some on-the-job training for my new job. I liked working with cars. It seemed like a fit for me. I also liked the solitude, working with my hands and focusing on just one thing. In my sister's house, living with a family of now 5, at times felt crowded. The boys were rambunctious, constantly asking questions about my time in the jungles of Vietnam. It was hard to talk about, and still is. The term PTSD, or post-traumatic stress disorder, was a fairly new term back then. It would be a while before I could figure it all out. My brother-in-law, being the workaholic that he was, had committed, or should I say promised, to take his sons to a family friend's farm for some target practice and maybe even some gopher control. My sister, feeling the repercussions from the boys if she said no, begged me for help. She wasn't much for guns, and well, I was a soldier. The friend's land was north, across the state line in Ohio. It would take the better part of a few hours due north, and then a few hours more to return home to Kentucky. It would have been a very long day in the car, but fortunately, we'd been invited to spend the night. At the time, I agreed to attend this outing. I had no idea that my sister was attempting to set me up with a friend of hers. Apparently, my brother was also aware, which explains why he graciously conceded, allowing me to have some time off so early in my new career. It was obvious who was the boss of the house. Sometimes you just don't question and you take it. I was in my late 20s and rarely dated. I suppose I was more interested in developing a career. Once that was taken care of, dating would follow. I had plenty of time, provided I'd find the right match. Well, my sister decided to get things moving along. Arriving at the farm, we were greeted by even more children that were the same age as my nephews. I was surrounded by children aging from 9 to 14, and they all wanted to target shoot. By far I had the most experience when it came to firearms. I felt a little overwhelmed and wasn't sure I was up for the challenge. So many kids. After lunch, my little army of boys marched over to the designated area used for target practice. There was one other man, an older gentleman who happened to own the farm, and mentioned to me that he too served and fought in World War II. We quickly bonded. He instructed me to stay out of the woods. No further explanation was given. I did my best to instruct, load, and reload the 4 long-barreled .22 rifles and stay on top of 9 boys that were literally running wild. Some of the smaller ones required more attention than the others. If I could just keep them off the range, everything would be good, right? Well, I think you know where this is going. Yeah. I lost track of 2 of the older kids, as well as 2 of the rifles. I wasn't immediately aware of their disappearance until I heard gunshots coming from the woods, which I specifically was told not to enter. It seems I had a dilemma on my hands. What could they be shooting at? I confiscated the 2 remaining rifles, sending all the boys back to the farmhouse and to the safety of their mothers. I rushed across the field, negotiated the stream, and tore into the woods, yelling the boys' names. I heard a yell back. Another 100 yards, and now I could see them. They were clustered together, pointing their rifles at something. Their shots for help were accompanied by a disturbingly low growl. Oh God, they've cornered a bear. What are these delinquents up to? Fall back, I yelled. Retreat, goddammit. What am I saying? These aren't soldiers. They're just little kids, and I have to put myself between them and the bear. Both boys stood motionless, guns aimed, slightly whimpering. Put the guns down, boys. Leave the bear alone. I don't think that's a bear, mister. I don't know what it is. Get behind me now, I said, and I want you to run back to the house, now. Tell the old man where I'm at. Okay. As the boys began to run, this thing made a motion and an attempt to follow them. Hey, I shouted. Over here. Jesus, what is this thing? It's a hairy-looking giant of a thing. It now regained its focus on me. We were now in the middle of an intense stare-down. Unlike the boys, I'd lowered my guns, but if needed, I would protect myself. This thing didn't recoil in fear. It wasn't afraid of me. At about 15 yards, I could see facial expressions, color, and general size, which, by the way, was enormous. My best guess was 7.5 to 8 feet. He was broad, easily twice my width as I stood 6 feet tall and 200 pounds. His traps and deltoids were huge. His body, most of it was covered in brown hair, not fur. Although his brow and the upper part of his face were contorted into a frown, His jaw kind of hung open. Of the teeth I could see, they appeared jagged, yellow, and spaced out like maybe some were missing. The low growls, along with his gigantic size, were absolutely intimidating. I wanted to run away too, but I had to give the boys time to get back, so I would distract it for as long as I could. What have I gotten myself into? It didn't take a soldier to understand that these 22s were useless, but it was all I had. I need to put some distance between us. But how? If I run, there's a good possibility he'll pursue. But I'm convinced I can outrun this thing. He looks too big and cumbersome. New plan. I take a few steps back, and to my surprise, he takes one large step forward, his right hand firmly grasping a low tree branch. It bends, but doesn't snap. Stepping into the light, I could see more of him, and I do mean him. Use your imagination. I see a splotch of red on his right leg. Was he shot? This thing is pissed, and probably in some pain. Looks like the boy shot him for sure. Shit. Okay. An even newer plan. I took another large step backward, but raised both of my rifles, and then I took another step back. After that, I took another one. Success. He seemed to get the picture. At least I thought so. I just wanted to get out of there. The stare down continued. Suddenly, there were gunshots, but not from a 22. It sounded deeper, longer, and close. The old man, who really wasn't that old, quickly approached and loudly commanded, "Walk towards me and point that gun down now." What? Do it now! Maybe it was the shouting of commands or the very loud sound of the shotgun, but this creature did not move a muscle. He seemed to be turned to stone, except for his eyes that followed my every movement until I left his woods. Both of us walked silently, side by side, all the way to the stream. Oh my God, that's about as close as I ever want to get to one of those things. And those boys, they were pretty shaken up. You look a bit flush yourself, as he dug his heel into the soft clay mud. Listen, I can't apologize enough. Thank you for what you did, and I yelled at you because I was trying to come off like an alpha male. And now I'm wondering if it worked, he said with a smile on his face. I may be onto something. I've read something in a National Geographic about gorillas in the wild. They're fascinating and at the same time downright frightening at the same time, don't you think? I had no response. The old man was just jabbering. I felt shell-shocked, but I managed to blurt out, "It didn't look like a gorilla to me, but it sure was hairy like one. And the kids. Yeah, of course. I wouldn't have let anything happen to them." You know what? A couple of my buds get together at the shop about once a week. When we're not recalling the past, we're talking about those damn things. I'd love for you to meet them. We call them boogers. You know, like the boogeyman. They seem to roam at night more often than during the day. They get real close to the house some nights. Sometimes they howl. Sends a shiver right down your spine. He spent the next hour just talking and talking about it, dissecting my experience and then his experiences. I was creeped out, but captivated at the same time. "So there's more than one?" I said. "Oh yeah, they've set roots down around here because lately it's all the buzz. And outsiders, like yourself, usually just dismiss it as a bear, barely noticing. I'll tell you what, I'm going to go inside and play it down to the boys for the benefit of everyone. Can't believe they're thinking they're crazy, right? Say, have you met my daughter?" I hope you enjoyed this encounter story. If you thought I told it well, you should have heard it from the man himself. I was chilled to the bone. I hope I did it justice. I kind of understand why people don't want to hear their voices, but in this case, I'm pretty sure a majority of people may have recognized his. That's all I'm allowed to say. On a separate note, please check the show notes for a link to Tom Lyons' audiobook, Bigfoot Frightening Encounters, narrated by me. Have a great evening, and as the old man said to me, stay sharp and keep your wits about you, and when you can't, run like hell.